man who needs no introduction.
The Black Information Network is committed to bringing you up-to-the-date news stories that are relevant, informative, and inspiring. And while news stories are always being updated and others are breaking, we understand that you need to be in the know all week long. Welcome to your Midweek Memo on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast with me, your host, Ramses Ja. All right, first and foremost, big news this week, depending on who you ask. A lot of folks expected it, but Trump notched out a commanding win in the Iowa caucuses as DeSantis edged out Haley for second place. This from the AP from Des Moines, Iowa. Former President Donald Trump scored a record-setting win in the Iowa caucuses on Monday with his rivals languishing far behind, a victory that affirmed his grip on the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. In what was the lowest turnout caucus in a quarter century, participants endured life-threatening cold and dangerous driving conditions to meet in hundreds of schools, churches, and community centers across the state. But those who ventured out delivered a roughly 30-point win for Trump that smashed the record for a contested Iowa Republican caucus with a margin of victory exceeding Bob Dole's nearly 13 percentage point victory in 1988. Now, as I mentioned, pretty much everybody expected this. He was polling with a commanding lead and is doing so pretty much everywhere. But this commanding lead isn't all doom and gloom for, Republicans who want an alternative to Trump. And indeed, caucuses are kind of funny. And there's a lot that many people don't know about caucuses. And I think that Sarah Haynes explained it best on The View. So let's take a listen.
Disappointing as a non-Trump supporter to see that.
Iowan.
Well, let me offer some color to this, though, to clarify this. It's disappointing to see that come out of Iowa, but let me add a little perspective and context. That's very important. Only 5% of the population of the state caucuses. So when you see Iowa swept, or Trump swept Iowa, no, he did not. He swept 5% of the population. Only 13% of registered Republicans in the state of Iowa, 13% of the party showed up for that. And only 3 times in the past 8 Republican caucuses have they even predicted the candidate. So although I am a proud Iowan and we love our caucus time because it makes you feel seen in a country where Iowa, we admittedly lead simple lives. Like nobody's checking on us. We're fine. We love the caucuses. We didn't earn it. We just get it historically. It's important to know those numbers when you're reading headlines because the headlines don't give you context. These are small numbers. And it's very important to remember that.
Moving on, a new poll reveals a generational divide among Black Americans on overturning affirmative action in higher education. This is from CNN, and I'll share a bit. While a majority of Americans of all races see the end of affirmative action as a mostly good thing, there is a generational split among Black adults over the impact of higher education and their racial group, according to a new Gallup Center on Black Voices report. Black adults' views on last year's Supreme Court ruling that colleges and universities can no longer take race into consideration as a specific basis in granting admissions are split. The survey found with 56% of those 40 and older viewing the decision negatively and 62% of younger adults viewing it positively. The findings released Tuesday were based on a Gallup panel survey with a sample of 12,443 adults living in the United States. The survey was conducted online between October 25th and November 9th. When asked about the ruling's impact, about half of Black adults said the ruling will mostly or slightly have a negative impact on higher education across the country. 17% said it will have no impact, and 33% said it will have a slightly or more positive impact, the survey found. But similar shares of Asian, Hispanic, and white adults, nearly 50%, said the ruling will have a slightly or more positive impact, according to this poll. So this was something that I personally did not expect to see. As far as the Supreme Court goes, the stories that we've covered with respect to the Supreme Court have kind of painted the Supreme Court as sort of being unhinged and really out of touch with what people want, the people, the citizens of the United States. And indeed, that is mostly true. And so I think that the ready assumption for me was that I would find that many people were in favor, particularly Black people, were in favor of affirmative action in the courts because there is a conservative majority there. Just overturn that because they don't believe that it benefits the country, despite it being what most of the people want. But seeing this Gallup poll reflecting that indeed it is what the majority of the population want was surprising to me. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing. I think that what it shows is three things. Number one, it shows a successful rebranding of affirmative action as a sort of academic or employment welfare instead of a corrective action to offset past injustices. In other words, the rebranding by the conservative facet of this country was successful, particularly so with younger people, younger participants in this poll, especially. And that rebrand has taken root in the consciousness of Black people as well. Another thing I think that it shows is that they've rewritten the narrative around individual accomplishments rather than systemic advantages or disadvantages affecting certain communities. And I think that I want to put the emphasis on advantages enjoyed by certain communities, because by saying, well, this really shows what an individual is capable of without getting a leg up, it ignores, naturally, it's meant to ignore the disadvantages and try to illuminate who can overcome these disadvantages, but it also ignores the advantages that some people enjoy. And that is something that absolutely shapes outcomes, and it certainly shapes outcomes for one group of people more than pretty much anyone else in this country. And without considering that, when comparing one group to another group, rates of this, that, or the other in our community versus this other community, I think we end up with a slanted view of how things are supposed to be. And it leaves a lot of context out of the conversation. The last thing that I think that this shows is that they've convinced enough people that this action harms white people and Asian people, particularly white children and Asian children en masse. And that has not necessarily been the case. Certainly there are individual people who might be able to point to affirmative action. But when you look at the data, when you look at the numbers overall, white people and Asian people are not being harmed. And yet when they are propped up as victims of affirmative action, particularly the children, the well-deserving children who are brilliant, worked hard and did everything their whole life, and all of a sudden they can't do it because they're giving it to some poor Black kid who doesn't deserve it, then it starts to pull on the heartstrings, not just of people in those communities, but of Black people. Because, it's very easy to say that, your welfare program is affecting deserving people. And, even Black people could feel bad if they buy into that type of narrative. What I'm going to do is actually do a full one more thing on this, because I think there's a lot more that needs to be said about this. But this is definitely something we need to keep in mind. And in addition, we need to keep in mind that our road is a long one. and sometimes after you take 3 steps forward, you end up taking a step back. And that's just kind of the way it goes. So we must, as always, keep going. This is your Midweek Memo on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast with me, your host, Ramses Ja. Finally, for your Midweek Memo, we're going to pull a story from Refinery 29. Black women won big at the Emmys, but it's embarrassing. Award shows are still making history. So I'm going to read this in its entirety. So I want to shout out the author. It's Kathleen Newman Bremeng. The 75th Primetime Emmy Awards was genuinely fun, surprising, sincere celebration of television. You could tell that the production team behind the show, the first all-Black team to helm the Emmys, knows and loves TV as much as the audience that stayed up on a holiday to watch the award show about television. The 2023 Emmys mine 75 years of the medium. It celebrates to bring us moments reuniting the casts of classic shows like Martin, Cheers, Grey's Anatomy, Ally McBeal, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, just to name a few. The author says, I'm a nostalgia-obsessed millennial, so I really enjoyed these reunions almost as much as I enjoyed watching multiple Black women win their respective categories last night. It was a historic evening, not just for Ayo Edebiri, Quinta Brunson, and Niecy Nash-Betts, but for other winners of color who became firsts, like Ali Wong and Trevor Noah. Their wins were all deserved. Their wins should be celebrated, and their wins, being well-placed exceptions in the Television Academy's 75-year history of giving out awards, should also be embarrassing for the Emmys. The retrospective reunions juxtaposed with the groundbreaking wins just further exposes how exclusionary the institution has been in the past, and how egregious it is that so many Black actors and their shows have been overlooked. Martin never won a single Emmy. Let's start there. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, so I think we're more than capable of simultaneously honoring our faves and acknowledging that the system that shut out so many others still exists, and that doesn't get dismantled in one night. Now, the reason I wanted to share all this is because I think that this reflects a small but important take on things, particularly the things that happen surrounding a Black first. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance. There's a lot of hoopla. And, some people really want for Black people to just stand in their own light. They want the progress to just be the progress without having to make a big deal out of it. And if you dig a little deeper, some people want that because they feel like by celebrating the progress, it further offends the sensibilities of the opposition, typically deeply conservative, often enough white men. It's almost like they think that we're rubbing it in that group's face. And, that maybe there's an argument to be made there. I recently came across a post on social media that celebrated an 8-year-old Black girl becoming the youngest Black female to go undefeated in a national chess competition. Her name is Diamond Shakur. And this happened, I believe, back in 2020. Or the article came out in 2020, but this was years prior to that she actually won this. But because of this circulating online still, it just kind of ruffled some feathers. These are from Black people, by the way, saying that, we should probably stop announcing the Black first for everything. We've had enough Black first. Now we need to just allow it to be normal, so that the world can view it as normal, as opposed to now we're getting ours and we're getting back and on and on. And again, I definitely understand people that want to make an argument like that. It's just based on your sensibilities and what you think is right. I personally love to celebrate a Black first of anything. You only get to be Black and first once. And after that, you're the second and the third. And those things don't really get as much in the way of celebration. So naturally, this isn't something that lasts forever. It just happens once in every category. And I think that by celebrating it, it reminds us that these types of accomplishments are special and rare. And often enough, it's because historically we've been excluded from consideration. We've been excluded from opportunities, whether directly or indirectly, based on circumstances, based on lack of access, etc. And so by celebrating these things, it reminds us that, oh, wow, you know what? That's right. I never heard of a little Black girl playing chess before. It just never entered into my consciousness. That always kind of seemed like a nerdy white guy, a white kid sort of game to play. So to know that Black girls are capable of excelling there as well, again, it's just a subtle reminder of that we belong everywhere and exactly what we're capable of. And I think the same holds true with the Emmys and award shows like this. Again, I understand that some people just say, okay, we got enough. Let's tone it down a little bit. But as I mentioned, we only need to be first once because we only get to be first once. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these and all the stories that we've discussed today. And you can certainly share those thoughts using the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app, or you can hit me on my social media at RamsesJah. And of course, these and all other stories can be found at BINnews.com. This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show was produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, RamsesJah, on all social media. And join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.